Hey friend, we are going to get started on building a new project today. Well, it's not going to look anything like this because this is just a reference diagram for me, but it's going to be a workbench. It's going to have drawers and shelves, and as always, it's going to be beginner friendly. But before we get started, if you are new here, I am Annika and I am here to demystify DIY and teach you all the things that you need to know to be able to build confidently. So let's get started. The entire leg frame of this workbench is built using 2x4s, so I cut those up on my miter saw. As always, I have the complete cut list, the dimensions, the detailed step-by-step schematics available for you, and I will add a link to the plans in the description below. 2x4s are always really rough, so I sent them through my planer and finished off with a little bit of sanding down to 150 grits. I didn't really need a whole lot of sanding because I'm not going to be staining or painting it because it's workshop furniture, but I just wanted to make sure that all the splinters were out. Now it's time for the pocket holes. I am using a Craig 720, but you can totally use any pocket hole jig. I have detailed tutorials on how to use pocket hole jigs as well as which jig is right for you if you're just starting out, so be sure to take a look at that. And if you are new to pocket holes or pocket holes just confuse you, definitely check out Pocket Hole Ninja, which is my step-by-step comprehensive program that walks you through exactly how to use pocket holes and build anything that you can imagine. Now let's get back to building. First up is building the leg frames. The bottom apron is offset from the ground, so I measured and marked that and attached the apron using pocket hole screws and wood glue. Now on the top, there are actually two aprons. One of them is offset by about 8 inches down and the other one is flush to the top. The one that is offset is essentially there because that's where the drawer slides are going to be attached to. With the aprons attached to one leg, it was time to attach the second leg. I made sure to measure and mark exactly where the aprons were going to go, so everything was equal and square. And that, my friends, is the first side complete. And of course, I did build a second side as well. Now it's time to attach the long aprons, and this can be really tricky because those aprons are super long, and the best way to do this I found was on the ground so that the surface tension of the wood glue and gravity helped me to hold the boards in place as I put in the pocket hole screws. Now comes the even trickier part where I need to attach these long aprons to the other side. Usually I just put this whole thing upside down, but with these long aprons, that was impossible. I tried to just hold it all together while I attached pocket hole screws, but obviously that didn't work. It was actually a good thing because I figured out that the sides needed to be flipped over so that the pocket holes were on the inside. After a little bit of troubleshooting, I figured out that I could use a 2x4 block, which was a cutoff from the boards that I had cut, and clamp it exactly where it needed to go and use that to support the long aprons as I added the pocket hole screws. And that is the beginnings of our workbench frame. Now, before I proceed any further, I'm going to go ahead and add in the bottom shelf, which is something I learned from my table saw build, where if you add the top aprons, it gets really hard to put in that huge shelf at the bottom. So I cut down my plywood sheets and I cut down notches for the legs on the corners. The plywood goes into the workbench frame. It was a nice tight fit and needed a little bit of persuading, but it fit right in. And at this point, it actually looks like a bed, and don't mind if I sit down and relax for a bit. Anyway, I did go ahead and attach the shelf to the frame using these long trim head screws, which I absolutely love. And now it is time to attach the rest of the aprons. And learning from my previous challenge, I clamped the 2x4 blocks to support the aprons as I was attaching them, and it worked like a charm. Now there is one more 2x4 in the middle, which basically acts as a support for the shelf as well as the drawer supports. So I measured exactly where they were supposed to be, and I tried to figure out how to hold them in place to attach. And the only way I could think of was to turn the entire thing on its side and then attach the boards. There is one more 2x4 that goes on top of this vertically, and this is what's going to support the drawer dividers later on. So I attached that using wood glue and pocket hole screws. They go into the sides as well as down into the apron. Alright, so now what's left is to add the drawers and the top and the shelf. But before we do that, I am going to go ahead and add the casters to the workbench, because one, right now it's a lot easier to turn it on its side, it's a lot less heavier, and two, it's just going to make it a lot easier to move it around as well. So for the casters, I prefer using these workbench casters. Now these are different from the regular casters where you have the wheel that goes underneath the workbench or whatever you're putting it on. This one goes on the side, and I absolutely love these, specifically because when they are disengaged, or rather engaged, when they're disengaged, the entire workbench sits on the ground. So it makes it super duper stable. And second, when it's on the ground, you know how the workshop floor is never even. So when it's on the ground, it's easy to add shims and level your workbench, keep it from wobbling, which is not something you can do with regular casters that go underneath your workbench. And two, when you want to lift it up and move it, you simply press on it, it moves. I have these workbench casters on my actual workbench as well as on my table saw stand, and I absolutely love them. They work beautifully, and I am so much more confident with the stability that the workbench has when they are disengaged. So I highly, highly recommend them, and I will add a link to these casters in the description below. The caster kit came with a template that I could easily use to mark and pre-drill the holes for the screws, and then I just went ahead and attached the casters on all 4 of the legs. So you see how it sits on the ground and is nice and stable, and if you want to move it, you simply push down on the pedal for the casters. The entire workbench lifts up and you can easily move it around. Now it's time to attach dividers, and these dividers are where our drawer slides are going to be attached to. So they have to be perfectly straight and square. I clamped a scrap piece of plywood underneath to support that divider while I attached it, and I had to make sure that everything was nice and square. Now it's time to build the drawers. The drawers are pretty straightforward to build, and I'm building them using plywood that I ripped down. I have a detailed video that walks you through exactly how to build drawers in 3 beginner-friendly ways and how to install them, and I will add a link to that in the description below. With all 3 drawers installed, it is time to finish this up. I added a shelf behind the drawers. Now this can be a continuous piece of plywood, but that would mean I would have to buy an entire new sheet, but I had enough scrap plywood to complete the shelf. It just means that there's going to be a joint in the shelf, and I'm totally okay with that. Then I added the uppermost aprons, and these aprons are going to support the top. So I added a good number of braces. And then I went a little crazy with the glue and added the top sheet of plywood to build out the top. And finally, to finish it off, I added the drawer fronts and the hardware. And that, my friends, is the workbench with all of the storage. It's got the 3 drawers, The casters are super easy to disengage to move the workbench around. There is a shelf in the back that is perfect for small tools or bins with screws, etc. The bottom shelf is great for scrap lumber or a shop vac or other tools. This workbench can be used in any workshop, but I did design it specifically for my CNC. So watch out for my CNC videos to see how this is being used. And remember, I've got the full detailed plans and the link is in the description below. If you have any questions, leave them below and I will see you next time.